Have you ever felt like you were rebuilding your life, but inside you were still walking in the dark, as if he had stitched up his wounds, learned to stand up, but even so, your soul still whispered in silence? Rumi said, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." But what if, even with the light, the void is still there? This is the part that no one talks about healing. The dark, silent part, where the soul no longer bleeds, but also no longer fits. You survived. You are healed. You've grown up. But why does it still feel like you're walking alone? An awakening souls start to see the world with different eyes. And this new perspective, although liberating, also isolates. You don't feel angry anymore. He doesn't want revenge. No longer drown in the pain of the past. But there is something that still weighs on my chest. Something subtle, deep, almost invisible. It's like you found peace, but lost your belonging. As if the cure had taken you away from everything that once made sense, including people. You might be wondering, was it me who changed, or the world that was left behind? This loneliness that comes after healing is a sacred solitude. It's no longer a lack. It's no longer abandonment. It's a spiritual silence that no one prepared you to feel. The soul, when awakened, begins to walk paths that others do not understand. And it hurts, because now you see what no one wants to see. Now you feel in a way that others don't know how to feel. And even though he has freed himself from the chains of the past, he still seems to be walking through an emotional desert. Healing is not the end of pain. It is the beginning of consciousness. And with awareness comes solitude. Silence comes. There comes the absence of what was once noise. You begin to realize how much of what you called life was just a distraction. How many relationships were just cracked mirrors trying to reflect a love you didn't feel for yourself? And now that you feel this love, now that you know who it is, why do you still feel so invisible? Does the soul, even when healed, still need to be seen? Or is there a deeper pain, that of being whole in a world that only recognizes the fragmented? Maybe what you feel today is not loneliness, but the absence of noises that previously anesthetized you. Maybe now you are finally listening to your soul. And her voice is not loud. She doesn't scream. She whispers. And in that whisper, there is a truth that will change everything. But before revealing what is behind this silence, I need to ask you, have you healed, but still feel alone? Do you also feel like your soul has awakened, and now no one recognizes you anymore? So stay with me until the end. Because what comes next is what no one ever told you about spiritual healing and the sacred solitude it brings. If any part of that silence echoed within you, write here in the comments, "I am healed, but I still walk alone." You may find you're not alone. Perhaps between these words, other souls are going through the same invisible journey. This video is not just about pain. It's about what comes after the pain. It's about that space that no one sees, but that lives inside you. So leave your like if this content touched something inside you. This isn't just support. It's a signal to the spiritual algorithm that you want more truths like this. And if you feel like you're walking inside, if you feel like the world no longer embraces you like it used to, subscribe to the channel. Here, every word is a mirror. Each video, a piece of your own path back home. Because the soul that has healed itself also deserves to be understood. And what comes next is the key to understanding why, even after healing, loneliness still remains. You feel like you've overcome the worst. You no longer cry every night. You no longer chase after those who didn't choose you. You no longer bend to fit into small spaces. You've already understood that some people didn't stay because they simply didn't know how. You've already accepted that some pains were teachers in disguise. And on the outside, everything seems calmer. Your reactions are softer, your speech more serene, your presence more complete. But inside, there's still an echo of loneliness. A silence that doesn't disappear, even on good days. An absence that no one else seems to notice, but that you feel with every sense of your soul. And then you wonder, why does healing seem so silent and so lonely? Why, even after rebuilding yourself, does it still feel like no one truly sees you? As if your soul has found a new language, but the whole world continues to speak in noise. As if you've elevated to a new frequency, but no one around you has noticed that something in you has changed. Deeply, there's a pain that's no longer about what happened. It's about what remains after everything has passed. About the empty space left by healing. Because no one prepares you for what's after. No one explains to you that when you finally learn to be self-sufficient, the world may start to cast you aside. Not out of malice, but because people have grown accustomed to the wounded version of you, the version that begged, that pleaded, that cried, that was accessible through pain, and now that you no longer bleed like you used to, they no longer know how to connect with you. And this creates a kind of invisibility that few recognize, because it's no longer the loneliness of someone who's hurt and needs saving. It's the loneliness of someone who's healed, but feels like no one knows how to get close. As if you've crossed a portal, but on the other side there's only silence. The soul is lighter, but the heart still searches for a reflection. A look that says, I've been there too. I've been reborn and survived the void. This is a delicate part of the spiritual process. When you begin to realize that healing didn't bring applause, it brought distance, that the peace you achieved has driven away those who only knew how to connect with your chaos. It's as if the world has no place for your new self, and that sometimes hurts more than the wound itself. And then you start to doubt. Was it real? Am I really okay? Or have I just gotten used to this silence? You find yourself looking in the mirror, not searching for beauty or flaws, but trying to recognize who you've become. Because after healing, there's not just a lighter body, there's a different soul, more sensitive, deeper, quieter. And the truth is, while you were in pain, you were still part of the crowd. But when you healed, something in you separated. You began to observe more than react, feel more than speak, trust the flow more than the promises. And that's lonely. Not because you're alone, but because now you can only connect with what's true. And truth, in this fast-paced and superficial world, is scarce. You begin to see that the greatest absence in your life was never that of another person. It was the absence of yourself. And now that you've returned within, no one else seems to accompany you. The awakened soul sees the masks, the noises, the emotional escapes of others. And so it becomes silent. So it observes. So it walks slowly, because it knows it can no longer go back to being who it was. And then, the longing sets in, not for anyone specific, but for the time when you still fit in, when your pain was familiar to others, when your vulnerability was understood. Now it seems you've lost even that. The reference, the meeting point, the place where you were seen without having to explain anything. Because now you no longer fit into the same conversations, the same cycles, the same expectations. It's as if healing had come at the cost of belonging, as if the price of finding oneself again was no longer being recognized by anyone. And this, in the silence of the early morning, in the midst of empty conversation, or even amidst fake smiles, weighs heavily. It weighs heavily. But this is the part few people talk about, the invisible part of emotional evolution. When you realize that healing doesn't solve everything, it only reveals what was always there, hidden beneath the noise. And now that you hear it, now that you feel it, you can no longer distract yourself. You can no longer pretend. You can no longer fit into what doesn't make sense. You begin to understand that there's a gap between healing and reconnecting, a sacred time where you walk alone, where the soul, even whole, still needs to find other spaces where it's welcomed without noise, a time where silence is your only mirror, where your presence is your only true companion. And in that moment, you might feel a new pain, one that doesn't come from a lack of love, but from an excess of awareness. Because now, you see everything clearly, and this clarity reveals how little you tolerated, how much you accepted crumbs, how much you confused intensity with reciprocity. But now it's over. Now you're too healed to pretend you still need what no longer feeds your soul. And that's beautiful, but it's also cruel. If you've come this far and felt that this text spoke to your truth, write in the comments, I am healed, but still invisible. Maybe someone will read it and feel like they've found you in that silence. There's a pain that doesn't come from what was done to you. It doesn't come from a spoken word, an explicit abandonment, or an unexpected breakup. This pain arises silently after everything has passed, when no one is watching, when everyone believes you're already okay. It doesn't scream, it doesn't bleed, it doesn't scandalize, but it consumes. It's the pain of being awake and realizing the world is still asleep. It's the pain of looking around and seeing that almost no one is willing to feel deeply, to look within, to truly exist fully. You no longer feel what you used to. but you also can't connect with what's around you. Everything seems shallow, automatic, out of place, and this isolates you. Rumi wrote, "When the soul awakens, the sleeping world begins to hurt," and that's exactly what begins to happen. The more you reconnect with your essence, the more you see how disconnected everything around you has always been. Maybe your soul has healed. Maybe you've broken old cycles, no longer accepting less than you deserve, and now know your worth. But the world around you still lives in the past. People remain trapped in the same emotional games, the same emptiness camouflaged by distractions, the same repetitions disguised as love, and so you feel out of place, as if you've escaped an emotional prison and are now in a world where no one understands the freedom you've discovered. This disconnect isn't spiritual arrogance, it's the result of contrast. You don't feel better than others. You just realize how much you no longer recognize yourself in the places where you once desperately tried to be seen. Now you feel the noise. You perceive the voids in conversations. You feel the weight of social masks. And none of this satisfies you anymore. Because the awakened soul no longer wants emotional crumbs. It wants presence. It wants truth. It wants meaningful silence, not empty words. And that, in the world we live in, has become rare. You begin to see that what you once called love was often attachment, that what you considered connection was a lack of harmony, and that for a long time, you lost yourself trying to fit into relationships that didn't honor who you are. Now that you've found yourself, you can no longer accept so little. But at the same time, you also don't know where to go, because this new version of you is still learning to live. You're still groping in the dark, searching for new places, new people, new ways to love without losing yourself. And this gap between the old and the new is lonely. It's during this gap that many souls become confused. They think they're regressing, when in fact they're just crossing the valley between their old wounded identity and their new healed identity. This is where the longing for a time you no longer want, but also can't forget, arises. The soul has healed, but it still feels orphaned, because everything you built before was built on pain. And now that pain no longer guides your steps, you still don't know who you are when you're at peace. This is the spiritual root of your feeling of emptiness. You're not weak, you're lucid. And lucidity, at first, is lonely. You're not lost, you're free. But freedom, when it arrives, doesn't bring a map. It only shows you that there are no more walls. And without walls, you need to learn to walk on your own, to trust the silence, to be guided by what you feel, not by what the world expects. Rumi said, "You have to keep breaking your heart until it opens. And now that your heart has opened, you begin to feel things that previously didn't fit inside you. Feelings that are more subtle, deeper, more real. And the world, unfortunately, still has difficulty dealing with realities that don't fit into predictable molds. You begin to realize that many around you have never looked within, that they flee the void by filling their time with noise, distraction, and haste, and that your presence now confronts them. Because you stopped running, you decided to be with yourself. You learned to exist without begging for company. And this bothers those who still depend on other people's approval to feel alive. This difference creates a chasm, and you find yourself alone on the other side. Not because there's no love, but because the kind of love you're now seeking isn't everywhere anymore. It demands awareness. It demands depth. It demands surrender without games. And that, in the dormant world, is frightening. People want love, but they don't want to die to their ego. They want connection, but they don't want to give up control. They want presence, but they can't stand the silence. You, on the other hand, have learned to love silence. You've learned to listen to what it says. You've learned that what's worthwhile doesn't make noise but touches deeply. And now, as much as you long to be understood, you're no longer willing to diminish yourself to be accepted. Because being whole in a world that only recognizes the fragmented is your new spiritual challenge. It's the price of lucidity. It's the weight of truth. But it's also the beginning of a new life. A life where you're no longer reacting to pain, but responding to your soul. If this text touched a silent place inside you, write in the comments, "I am awake but still distant." Maybe you'll find an echo. Maybe someone will read it and feel like they recognize you in this void full of meaning. What no one told you, and perhaps you're only just beginning to realize now, is that true healing isn't an end point. It's not the conclusion of the story. It's not the day you wake up and everything is fine. True healing is the beginning of another journey. A quieter, deeper, more honest journey, and therefore more solitary. It's a path where external noises no longer matter, but where internal noises become clearer. A path where you stop seeking answers outside and begin to listen to the questions your own soul has been asking for years. The hidden key that almost no one reveals is this: the moment you heal is the same moment you begin to see what others still can't. And this seeing is the beginning of a new pain, a pain of clarity, a pain of lucidity, because truly seeing is a spiritual privilege but also a human burden. The awakened soul sees the layers, feels the details, perceives what lies beyond the surface, and this separates you, not out of arrogance, but out of sensitivity. You begin to feel too much. You begin to realize how much the world still lives on appearances, how much people hide from themselves, how much they cling to chaos because they can't stand silence. And it's in silence that you begin to live. It's in silence that your healing truly happens. It's not when you shout that you're okay. It's when you no longer need to say anything. When peace becomes a state, not a performance. When you stop proving yourself, justifying yourself, trying to explain your choices to those who aren't ready to hear them. When you simply withdraw, not as an escape, but as protection. Because the healed soul learns to protect itself from everything that once seemed like love, but was just emotional dependence in disguise. True healing is the silence you learn to love. This phrase, spoken at any other time in your life, might not have made sense, but now it pulsates. Now it touches something you finally understand. Because now you understand that the noise that hurt you most wasn't the world's, it was your own mind begging for validation. And when that noise stops, what remains is space. A strange, uncomfortable, vast, but sacred space. In this space, everything changes. You stop chasing. You stop justifying absences. You stop insisting on locked doors. And you start observing. You start breathing differently. You begin to feel a lightness that at first is even frightening, because you've grown accustomed to the weight, to the urgency, to the drama. And now, the silence seems too great. But over time you realize, this silence is your soul reorganizing everything. And here's another truth no one told you. The more you heal, the more selective you become. Not because you feel superior, but because you understand the value of your energy. You start to decline invitations that don't nourish you. You start to avoid conversations that don't elevate you. You start to distance yourself from everything that still vibrates with fear, competition, and attachment. And that's lonely. Because most of the world isn't yet ready to live deeply. The hidden key to healing lies in letting go of the version of yourself that lived to be loved. You are no longer here to be chosen. You are here to choose. And your main choice now is to preserve your peace. This choice at times will make you feel like you're losing people, opportunities, stories. But in truth, you are gaining yourself. You are letting go of what was a distraction to dive into what is true. And truth at first is scary, because it demands surrender. It demands courage. It demands presence. Rumi said that the wound is the place where the light enters you. But what few understand is that once the light enters, you will never be the same again. You can't go back to who you were. You can no longer pretend you don't know. You can no longer sabotage yourself for the sake of companionship. You can no longer remain silent in the face of a feeling screaming inside your chest. And that is liberating, and also painful. Because while everyone celebrates your overcoming, you're dealing with a new absence. The absence of belonging. The absence of identification. The absence of everything that once held you captive, but also made you feel part of something. Now you are part of yourself. Now you are your own home. Now you've learned to stay, even when no one else will. And perhaps in this process, you'll miss the time when you didn't yet know. You'll miss the emotional ignorance that allowed you to fit in. But this longing will pass. It's not from pain. It's from illusion. And every awakened soul goes through this morning. The morning of the old version. The morning of shallow connections. The morning of the before consciousness. But with time, this morning turns into strength. It turns into faith. It turns into a silent certainty that you are exactly where you should be. What no one told you is that truly healing isn't a destination. It's a journey, a sacred journey. And those who cross this path don't return the same. They return lighter, truer, lonelier perhaps, but infinitely more whole. If this text resonated with you, write in the comments. Silence became my cure. Perhaps in that sentence, another soul will recognize itself, and perhaps in that recognition, you'll realize that, even though you walk alone, you've never truly been alone. Maybe you've already left that relationship that kept you trapped inside, the one where you felt small, unappreciated, always begging for scraps of attention and answers that never came. Maybe you've learned to say no, not to what hurt, not to what made you forget who you were, not to the distorted love you accepted out of fear of being alone. Maybe you've learned that deserving love doesn't mean submitting to pain, that respect isn't negotiable, that presence can't be begged for. And now, finally free, you look around. You expected peace, you expected relief, you expected to feel light, and yes, there are moments when you do. But along with this lightness also came silence, a silence no one prepared you for, because what no one told you is that after leaving what was destroying you, comes an empty space where everything needs to be rebuilt from scratch, without the old patterns, without the old habits, without the old needs. You look around and feel that no one is walking beside you, not in the way you need now, not with the conscious presence that your soul, after all, has learned to crave, because now you no longer want just any company. You no longer want partial presence. You no longer want eyes that look without seeing. Now, what you desire is not intensity, it is depth, and this depth is rare, because the world still operates on the logic of immediacy, distraction, and superficial connection. Before, you suffered from the other person's absence, from the lack of answers, from the coldness, from the broken promises. You suffered because you felt you needed someone to feel complete. Now the pain has a different name. Now you suffer because you're closer to yourself, and far from everything that was an illusion. Now it hurts no longer because they hurt you, but because you realize how much you've hurt yourself trying to fit in where you were never truly welcomed. Now you see clearly, and clarity brings a new kind of loneliness. A lucid loneliness born not from a lack of love from others, but from your inability to continue accepting what little you have. This is evolution, but it's also loneliness, and there's no shame in that. Growing spiritually often means losing old references. It's seeing friends drift away. It's no longer being able to talk about the same things. It's no longer fitting in the same places, because now you no longer want to escape yourself. You want to dive in. You want to understand. You want to feel truthfully. You want to love with presence. You want to live meaningfully. And the world, often, isn't ready for that. Maybe you're experiencing exactly this right now. Maybe you've left that relationship that held you back, not just with someone else, but with the wounded version of yourself. Maybe you've overcome abandonment, rejection, the need to prove your worth. And now that there's no one left to convince, now that you know your worth, now that you no longer need to beg for love, you feel alone, not because you're lost, but because you finally found yourself. And this reunion with yourself has severed all the connections that depended on your absence. You're no longer willing to pretend. You're no longer available for lukewarm relationships, shallow conversations, or promises without presence. You want soul. You want truth. You want someone who listens to you even in silence. But until you find that, you walk alone. Because the path between wound and healing is personal. It's intimate. It's sacred. No one can walk it for you. And here's a profound point. The soul, when it heals, begins to say no more often. No to everything that no longer resonates with its new frequency. No to empty invitations. No to loves that demand you diminish yourself. No to friendships that only worked while you betrayed yourself. And these no's cleanse your life. But at the same time, they empty your days. Because until the new arrives, you must live with the absence of the old. And that is courageous. That is the true alchemy of the soul. The pain now is different. It's the pain of transition. The pain of no longer identifying with the old, but not yet belonging to the new. It's the pain of being halfway. Of knowing you did the right thing by walking away from everything that no longer made sense, but still not having found what makes sense. It's a kind of spiritual mourning. You bury versions of yourself that have accompanied you for years, and with them, you bury dreams that no longer make sense, bonds that no longer hold water, expectations that only existed in your wounded self. And then, in the midst of this journey, a different kind of loneliness emerges, one that doesn't hurt like before, but that doesn't comfort either. A loneliness of construction, of gestation, as if something inside you were being formed, but didn't yet have a name. And you need to wait, and trust, and not give in to the temptation to return to what no longer serves you, just to avoid feeling that emptiness. Because now you understand, a healed soul can no longer live on illusions. And maybe no one is telling you this. Maybe everyone around you is expecting you to be fine. Maybe they think you've overcome it all. But you know, true overcoming isn't a smile on your face. It's the silence you maintain when you realize you've matured too much to respond to something that doesn't deserve an answer. It's the serenity of someone who no longer despairs of reciprocity. It's the presence of someone who has learned to be self-sufficient. If you felt all this as if it were about you, write in the comments, "I am cured, but I still walk alone." Maybe someone will read it. Maybe someone will recognize themselves. And maybe, just maybe, this phrase will be the invisible thread connecting two awakened souls who have learned to love each other, even in the absence of everyone. A healed soul no longer kneels before the gaze of others. It no longer needs the acceptance it once craved, nor the applause that once seemed essential for it to believe in its own worth. There is a subtle but irreversible shift when you awaken spiritually. Something within you rises even if there is still pain, even if there is still longing, even if the world outside remains confusing, noisy, and distracted. You begin to realize that your freedom no longer depends on others understanding you. Your truth is enough, Rumi said. Don't be content with stories of how things happen to others. Awaken your own legend. This phrase isn't just beautiful. It's a call for you to stop feeding off the lives of others, their paths, their choices, and to truly start living your own. Because when you truly heal, you no longer want to repeat. You want to create. You want to live with authorship. You want to make your existence a legitimate expression of your soul. And this is the turning point that changes everything. Before, you wanted to be chosen. Today, you choose. Before, you molded yourself to fit in. Today, you expand. Before, you dimmed your light for fear of disturbing others. Now you understand that your light was made precisely to shine in places where others are still dimmed. And if that bothers you, you no longer bow, because the healed soul knows the price it paid to become whole. You don't walk alone, although at times it may seem so. You walk with your truth. And truth isn't noisy. It's firm, silent, consistent. It doesn't need to be defended. It sustains itself. And this invisible force begins to guide your steps. You no longer run where everyone else is going. You listen to your own rhythm, follow your own time. This doesn't mean everything has become easy. It means that everything now is truer, including the pain. Spiritual awareness doesn't free you from suffering, but it does free you from prison. You may still feel fear, doubt, and longing, but you no longer live in chains. Now, you feel and choose. You feel and breathe. You feel and move on. The difference is this. Now, you feel with awareness, and that changes everything. You begin to realize that not everyone will understand your journey. And for the first time, this doesn't make you despair. You no longer need validation. You don't need to be understood at every step, because now you understand yourself, and this inner understanding becomes your new home. You are at peace with your own company. You are comfortable with your silences. You are at home within your own chest. This is where true empowerment begins, when you're no longer reacting to the world, but responding to your soul. When the choices you make aren't based on what will please, but on what will align you. You stop building your life around the fear of rejection and start building it based on the desire to be honest. With yourself, with what you feel, with what you believe, with what you dream. Spirituality at this point stops being a distant idea and becomes a daily practice. It's no longer about quoting pretty phrases, but about living what you say. It's about being consistent between what you think, what you feel, and what you do. It's about embodying the truth you've spent so long finding. And then you realize the miracle wasn't surviving. It wasn't going through everything and still being here. The miracle is becoming who you are, even after everything. The miracle is being able to look in the mirror and see a face that no longer needs a mask. It's realizing that you can walk alone, not because you were abandoned, but because you finally learned to be present for yourself. You begin to understand that there's dignity in not explaining yourself, that there's peace in not convincing anyone, that there's strength in not conforming. And this strength doesn't come from outside. It comes from your soul, which after being ignored for so long has finally been heard, and now it guides, subtly, firmly, with purpose. You start to put in less effort, to maintain relationships, to maintain characters, to fake feelings, because the effort is no longer to please, it's to stay in alignment. And what's no longer in harmony with who you are simply doesn't hold up, no matter how comfortable it once was. You no longer betray yourself to maintain what no longer resonates with your truth. And that in itself is revolution. Internal, silent, irreversible. If you've read this far and feel like your soul is going through exactly this moment, write in the comments, "My truth guides me." Perhaps this phrase is the mirror another soul needed to find. And perhaps in this reflection, you'll remember that walking with your own truth is the most sacred step of all. If you've made it this far, know this, it says a lot about you. It says your soul is ready for deeper dives, that you're no longer content with the superficial, that something inside you is awakening, and perhaps finally, healing. This space is yours. Here your pain is understood as poetry. Here words aren't just words, they're bridges. Bridges between your story and your truth, between your wound and your light. So if this journey resonated with you, if something here touched parts of you that no one else usually reaches, subscribe to the channel now, because what's blossoming between us is more than content. It's a spiritual connection. And I want to see you here again on the next journey. Oh, and if this video spoke to your soul, like it, not out of vanity, but so the universe can carry this message to other souls who are also ready to awaken. And now the next video is already appearing on your screen. It's the continuation of the journey. Click on it, because the journey is just beginning.